Hey folks, this video is an interview that I did with Wes Corbett about a month ago, just before the release of his new record Cascade. If you haven't checked out that album, you have to check it out. It's really great. But there's something else you need to check out, which is Wes's YouTube channel. He's been uploading these really cool videos of himself playing all the tunes from this record live in studio, so you can watch the solos, the backup, everything. So check out the link in the description of this video, go subscribe to his YouTube channel and check out those videos. They're really great. Of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel, check out patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo, but otherwise, just enjoy this interview with Wes Corbett. Wes, how's it going?
Going good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, nice to speak with you. I think it's been probably at least a year since we've actually seen each other. Yeah, maybe longer.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Luckily, we've been able to talk a little bit the last couple months and work this out, and it's been such a pleasure to work on learning this tune and learning the solo, transcribing the solo, learning how to play it and talk to you a bit. But I'm hoping today that we can talk more about the record and this tune and maybe uncover some things that I can learn and hopefully maybe then transmit to the people here on YouTube as well, if that works for you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. So as you might know, if you've seen the video that I posted just a few days ago, Wes has a new record out called Cascade, and I was lucky enough to be able to learn one of the tunes from his record called Mary Evelyn and learn the solo as well. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to check out that video as well. But now let's just get into a little bit of what I'm curious about when it comes to Wes's playing and improvising. So the first thing I think about with this tune is that I've actually known about this tune for a couple of years now, at least. I think there's a video maybe from 2014 of you playing this tune, which means obviously that this tune is probably, I would guess, is this one of the older tunes on the record, maybe the oldest tune on the record?
It's up there for sure. There's a couple of tunes. There's another one called Long Winter that these were written almost back to back. I forget what order, but they were both written in the winter of 2013. So I was still living in Boston, and there was this epic blizzard. So I was snowed in for like a week and a half.
Yeah.
Actually, both those tunes came out.
Yeah. Well, good. Being stuck inside is maybe a good opportunity to be creative. What an interesting parallel to today.
Yes.
How about that?
Yeah.
So with a tune like Mary Evelyn, or anything that you wrote so long ago as it feels now, like it just, to me, it feels like such a long time ago to think back to 2013 and then have tunes that I'm sure are newer on the record. I'm always curious about the way that people structure their composing, whether some people come to an idea by accident and develop it, or whether people kind of set aside time to do these things. So maybe if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what the process looked like for that tune, maybe of writing that tune, and how maybe that how common that strategy was, whatever brought that tune is, how common that is for you, and maybe if that's changed over the years with the more recent tunes that you've written.
Sure. Yeah. So Mary Evelyn is probably the most banjo-driven tune on the record, I'd say, in terms of how it was written, and that's not very typical for me. A lot of the time, I try to center my writing on my voice, like my actual singing voice. Whether that's like that I find a melody that I really like and I figure out how to play it on the banjo, or I find a chord progression I really like and I sing changes over top of it. So like Waltz for Courtney, which is actually a tune that I wrote as my wife and I's first dance at our wedding. I found that chord progression and then sang that entire melody over top of it. That's where that tune came from. The banjo portion of it came, as a mechanical element. Whereas Mary Evelyn really was very driven by the banjo. I'm going to grab the banjo.
Yeah.
But let's see here. So the thing about that tune is it's kind of based a huge portion of it is based out of kind of one roll pattern, which is this. I'm doing it on the inside strings. Here it is on like 1, 2, 3. So you can get this this really cool thing where you can have essentially like a low voice, a middle voice, and a high voice. And a lot of the time, there's kind of, how to put it? Well, there's typically in this tune a line cliche in the low voice, meaning that something is moving down a lot of the time in half steps. And then there's also a bunch of voicings in this tune where the top voice is kind of toggling between 2 or maybe even 3 notes. So like a good example of that would be this. So, but I think actually when I'm thinking back on the like actual inception of this tune, that first phrase is what came first. I just really liked that. It was really pretty. And again, it's really banjo-y, right? I mean, it all lays on the banjo really well. And I think maybe from that moment, I was like, interesting. This phrase is harmonically, basically not because I'm not capoed. It's like, is this in G or is this in D? Right? And the whole tune kind of is like, what key is this in? And that's kind of a family of like, I don't know, new acoustic composition that I think about, I don't know, like one little bracket that I've made. You know, there are fiddle tunes that feel that way too, where it's like Squirrel Hunters is a great example, right?
Right.
You could argue that tune is in A, you could argue that it's in E, right? There's a lot of different ways to think about it. So I found that first phrase, and then I think I've been messing with a few little like arpeggiated things within that roll pattern that I was just talking about. And so I kind of just let the banjo lead me on this one. So there's also a bunch of kind of recycled melodic material that's then being reharmonized. So the first time this happens, it's harmonized over E minor, F sharp, G. And then the second time it happens, it's harmonized over G, A to B minor. There's lots of little tricks in there, right? And then another thing that's kind of interesting, taking this lick, that is actually all over a 4 chord, all over a G chord. I think of this tune being in D, really, when, you know. So I found this melody, and then I like to take a chordal approach that's maybe a little more surprising, you know, because there are obvious choices, and then there are choices that are going to give you more color, make the whole thing kind of flow better. The B section is kind of a mixture of recycled material as well, but I did think that there's kind of a space where it just sits on the 4 chord for a second. And I kind of play something different every time. Like every take in the studio was different just in that moment. So that's coming from here. That's the top of the B section right there. That's kind of new material, but we're doing this like 4th-y sound thing, which again kind of pushes us into like ambiguous key center land a little bit. That phrase, it's kind of a not exact note for note, but an echo of that down lower, right? and then we go into this whole series of kind of like line cliche on the bottom, toggled note on top. And it's kind of a funny thing because it's like a line cliche to nowhere in this weird way, right? Like it just does this, which like isn't really a thing. Somehow it is though. It's kind of it's like a happy, not accident, but again, I think it's kind of made it's providing the evidence that like a lot of this tune was really banjo driven.
Mm.
And yet maybe I think it's still somewhat lyrical. I mean, I think it'd be a doozy of a melody to like actually sing vocally, but there's I think a lot of melody to connect to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you mention the line cliche to nowhere, because one of my favorite things about the tune is actually like you get these moments of where the chords seem to remind me of these progressions I've heard in other songs, or these I don't want to say not standard in any way, but like these like moments of chord progressions, especially the line cliche parts where it's like, oh, I've definitely heard that in a Beatles song. I've definitely heard that in something like that. But it's all kind of in the middle of this, harmonically ambiguous thing. So it actually, but that actually kind of, to me anyway, is its defining characteristic is that you got kind of this like ocean of D and these things popping up here and there, but it doesn't need to be so predictable as to you have this consistent A to B path all the time that just ties itself up in a bow. I think that actually is what draws it to me. Is it so cyclical also? Is it just flows so well from one instrument to the next? I mean, I think that's also, when we get into talking more about improvising in the solos, just the arrangement of the tune feels so natural for that reason also, because by the time that first solo starts after the melody, it doesn't feel so much like, okay, I'm done, now you go. It feels really like it's like you're passing the baton, like it's actually continuing. It's not starting over. It's like, whatever it is. So
that's something there's a camp in Northern California in Mount Shasta that Tristan and Tashina Claridge put on that I've been to a number of times. I haven't been in a while, but Edgar Meyer was there one year and he taught kind of a master class, kind of, or like a lecture demonstration. He took some questions and he was asking about composition. And one thing that really stuck out to me is a really simple statement, which is like, only put a period at the end of a phrase if you really mean it.
mm.
Right? Like commas are much better.
Yeah.
Because if you're writing a tune, sometimes I'll get stuck, right? You write this like little fragment of something and it just keeps wanting to repeat. That tells me there's a period at the end of this sentence and I need to figure out how to turn it into a comma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, working through this tune over the course of maybe like a week, I kind of like kept tweaking little things to just help it do that, to like help it just keep wanting to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting one in the studio. It was actually the one of all the tunes I wasn't sure if it was going to make it on the record. I had some other things to try out as backup, just because it's hard. It's a hard thing to do right. And Chris Eldridge, who produced the record, we got together a bunch of times, just the two of us, to kind of workshop these tunes and tweak little details. And this one was always like, okay, so like we played it, like us jamming on it as a duo didn't work really. It's the only one that we couldn't really ever like get it to function the way that I had hoped it would function. But the answer was again kind of bizarrely simple. I mean, it was like, let's just play this like it's a picker, play this and arrange it like it's like we're playing Shenandoah Breakdown. you know.
Yeah.
Except that it's like I don't what Critter called it a complicated picker, basically,
Yeah.
where it's like it has this illusion of being having that kind of effortless quality that like if you and I got together and played Shenandoah Breakdown together, we could do that thing. Um, but but for all of us, it took a minute to like dial in to what how to make that sound happen.
Yeah. Right.
And once it was there, it was there. We got it in like 2 takes or something. Once we had actually kind of workshopped it as an ensemble.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Well, that also raises separate a little bit from that. You said that you had other things that you had been thinking about or that could go in that place. Do you in terms of and I don't know how long this has maybe been the case, but it sounds like you've got other tunes to choose from. Would you consider yourself someone who's kind of always writing tunes or getting things out in that way?
Yeah, for the most part, I've had a few times in my life where I wasn't writing, but they've been pretty few and far between. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not writing like a tune a day or something, but I do have I tend to write a lot. I think I get um, even like transcribing for me almost always ends up with me like only making it like a third of the way through transcribing something, and I usually end up taking something that I learned and being really excited about it, kind of putting it through its paces on the banjo, and a lot of the time ending up writing something because of it.
Mm.
um, so so that,
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've had that experience transcribing something and for a moment even being disappointed, like, oh, I never finished that because I was so excited about the thing I had found. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful thing to be when you're distracted by something you're so excited about. I later on feel like that was a productive thing to do. So as much as I'm interested in composing, I'm also interested in uh, your process with improvisation on the record and just in general. And I know this can be such a gigantic topic. Um, so maybe I'll start with it very broad, and then I can zoom in on some things if possible. But just knowing a little bit about your background after listening to the Picky Fingers podcast. By the way, check out the Picky Fingers podcast that Keith Billick hosts. Wes has a great episode on there.
another one actually too.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Oh, are you doing another one? Good, great. So just knowing a little bit about you from that and from knowing you, it seems like this style of banjo improvisation, what we're calling progressive bluegrass banjo, has kind of been consistently what you're working on and doing as a banjo player. So obviously, it seems like improvisation on fiddle tunes, but also the tunes that you're writing has probably taken up a lot of that practice time. Working on that thing. So I think for some people, what's difficult about learning to improvise is sometimes even just knowing the day to day of what to work on and how to get into that. So again, kind of like with the composition, talking about your process with that then and now. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about your process of what you're maybe if you remember productive things that you did getting into improvisation and developing those techniques, but also talk about maybe your experience with letting some of those things go. I think we've talked a little bit about there's the technical aspect of some of this stuff, and that it's not necessarily that you're practicing scale exercises all day every day to get to what you're doing. It might require refocusing in some way. So maybe you can even just start with talking about some of the ways that you got into improvisation with the banjo.
Yeah, well, so I definitely have my first banjo teacher, a guy named Dave Keenan in Seattle, to thank for kind of just setting me off down the improvisation path from the beginning. I
Mm.
studied classical piano with a really amazing piano teacher on Bainbridge Island, where I'm from, named Peggy Swingle, when I was 2.5 in the Lexington method. And so my ears have always been my strong point. I actually like kind of faked reading music for a long time you know, um, but, uh, Dave started teaching me how to improvise. I'm pretty sure probably from like lesson two.
Mm.
He gave me, like, I learned Cripple Creek in my first lesson and came back and knew it, and we played it together. He's a really great banjo player and a great guitar player. And he taught me a couple little variation, right? Just in the beginning, and was like, you can mix and match these, like, so mess around with that. So I messed around with that, and I think I even maybe came up with a couple of little variations on my own. I don't remember what they were. But that was always at the core of how he taught things. It was like, here's an arrangement, but take a look at this lick and take a look at this lick, and you could like swap these, or you could take this lick that we learned in whatever grandfather's clock, and you could play this in Cripple Creek. Like, it was just kind of rooted from the get-go that everything can be mixed and matched and reordered. And that was such an exciting thing for me, coming from classical piano, where things were just like played verbatim. And I love classical music, don't get me wrong, but in terms of kind of from the more progressive side, because you can think of banjo, like banjo players, three finger banjo players are, especially sort of from the like modern, like progressive banjo player standpoint, we're kind of expected to be bilingual, right? Like, we're expected to be a really good Scruggs style player, which is a language that is completely unique to the five string banjo. And we're also expected to be able to improvise over everything else within like a standard Western harmony approach. And so I think, yes, I did spend a lot of time working on like understanding chord shapes, how chord shapes connect to each other, understanding scale patterns in a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different approaches. I think the more you can kind of interleave all of those things, the better off you are. Understanding harmonized scales really well, understanding things from single string, from melodic style, and from Scruggs style. All of this for me has ended up a bunch of years down the road, kind of piling into something that my ear is, I think, fundamentally connected to. And I think that that's something we talked about a little bit on a call that wasn't recorded, but just about that banjo is so non-linear that it's so easy to play with your eyes, not
Mm.
right. Melodic style, for instance, it's like it's pretty bizarre, like how where the notes are, how they're all ordered. There's so much kind of muscle memory involved with it that it's really easy to not have your ear connected to what you're playing. So one thing that I always did and I've always loved to do on the banjo is just take some time at the end of every practice session and kind of just explore a tune that you're working on, that I've been working on. So like, now I'm going to explore improvising over these changes. Or it could be like totally free form. A bunch of tunes for me have come out of like being excited about whatever I learned and kind of letting that percolate, and then it comes out in an exploration. And that could be 5 minutes of practice time at the end, or it could be 2 hours. Like if you get really excited. But I think trying to always keep like one foot in the door of like, I can play things note for note that I want to play note for note, but that everything is also flexible
Mm.
at the same time. That's a really hard juggling act to maintain. And it's a muscle you just kind of have to keep flexing. So one way that I would structure it is like, take a fiddle tune, for instance, and play over it really, really slow, and try to make sure that my ear was connected to every note that I was playing. So sometimes that meant that I was actually singing it out loud as I was playing it, or sometimes that means that the singing part is internalized, because I didn't want to be like one of those players that's like totally stuck to like singing everything that they play at the same time. Not, I mean, there's some amazing players that have done that on lots of different instruments, But um, so I found that to be really helpful. So as you're kind of learning these really mechanical things, that you're always trying to keep them loose, because it's really easy to be really rigid with like, I practice this scale pattern. So then when it comes back to like improvising, you're like, I sound like this scale pattern, right?
Yep.
But like I said, it's kind of this juggling act of the mechanical and the creative.
Yeah. Yeah, and that juggling act seems like what you're pointing at is that there's this consistent work that has to be done to maintain the proficiency there. So what does sometimes when I talk to people, they have like a very specific practice routine, or oftentimes I talk to people who I figure must be practicing all the time, and they say, "Oh yeah, I have no time, and I play 20 minutes once a week if I'm lucky, whatever it is." But um, would you can say that you're kind of on the more organized side of the practicing scale, or the more regular side of the practice scale, maybe?
I think I would definitely not categorize myself as organized within practicing metric.
Hmm.
But I would say that when I have a specific project to be working on, I uh, I'm my work ethic is really good.
Hmm.
And when I don't have a project set for myself, my work ethic is pretty bad,
Hmm.
frankly.
Yeah.
Uh, so um, arranging and finishing writing all of the tunes for Cascade, and really wanting to be able to like improvise in the studio. So I improvised almost everything solo wise on the record, and that was a goal that I kind of set for myself. Like I really want this. Like this record is about these compositions and the musicians that they're written for. Like these are written specifically for the people who are playing on this record and arranged specifically for those people. Um, and I knew that they were all going to improvise. I mean, everybody who played on this record is epically virtuosic.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to. I didn't want to come into that with this like rigid like, and I composed this solo and it's this perfect precious thing. Like I wanted everything to have that kind of liquid quality to it.
Hmm.
Um, so I worked really hard on that. I worked, made sure that I could play the heads to everything really, really cleanly, and then I practiced improvising over those changes. And a lot of the time, it was me doing it at like half speed. Be like, okay, in a perfect world, like if I'm not talking about just kind of pure mechanics and execution of those mechanics, like what would I actually want to play over these changes? My ear is like all the way connected.
Hmm.
I think that's a really great kind of starting point. Be like, oh, this is what I wish I sounded like when I was playing up to speed. And the
Hmm.
closer, the more you can kind of chase the coattails of that, better.
Hmm. Yeah, I just having talked about this recently, we had a little bit of this conversation talking about that playing these tunes. I find it such an interesting. It's very revealing that sometimes uh, I'll find the things that I there are times when it's these are the things I wish I it's sometimes it's these are the things I wish I could play or think up at this speed, whatever it was, and so much more often though it ends up being these are the things that I wish I was willing to throw out the stuff that I'm comfortable playing so that I could let this thing happen. Sometimes the things that are just going to come out of the fingertips at full speed that are covering up what would be otherwise something nice. So it's I like that. Returning to that has kind of wiped away some of the old habits in terms of things that are always the right number of notes in the right key that don't really mean a whole lot.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I don't know. Um, I guess this is sort of getting kind of woo woo or something, but like, I feel like for me, the music that I'm really proud of, whether that's been played live or recorded, 100% every time. It's like it started here and then goes here and comes out here,
Hmm.
right? If all of those things are working in sync, then then good things are going to happen. And if they're getting jammed up one way or another, then it's not going to work as well.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, in terms of like different contexts in which you're kind of attempting to do this, well, in my opinion, consistently succeeding to do that. But as a person who does it, I can imagine you've kind of got your own feelings about different scenarios that you're in. But just as for two examples, one context in which you might be trying to do this is on stage in front of a big crowd with Sam Bush, which is one type of pressure, I would imagine. I'm sure that's like a huge blast and super fun.
Yeah.
Um, I imagine there's a little bit of a certain type of pressure there, or maybe there was at some point. And then the other one would be this record that you're making in the studio, which is a certain environment to try to, make art in with all these other killer musicians, and perhaps maybe clock is ticking. Maybe I'm putting on too much of this like pressure thing, but that's a big part of what I perceive in myself when I'm trying to do any of this stuff. But in terms of like making choices, do you find yourself making choices differently in the studio versus a live situation in terms of like maybe taking risks or not necessarily planning ahead, but do you have any sense of that of there being a difference in those situations? I guess we can also throw in like late night jam at IBMA in some hotel room that couldn't be less pressure maybe or something. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, well, it's kind of a multi-layered answer, I guess. I mean, playing with Sam, um, I expected to feel more nervous than I did, and I think that that's a testament to that band.
Hmm.
This is not some like me patting myself on the back or something. It's just that like that crew of musicians are just so um, sort of endlessly empathetic with how they play music. You kind of can't help but play well. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, like my I've only played 21 gigs with the band so far, but like my bad nights, the couple of nights where I've just like, you just don't. You have those shows where you're just like, no, I just didn't like. It just wasn't that. It
Yeah.
wasn't on my A game or something. Um, I think that my lowest lows on those are still like so much higher than they ever have been with any other band, and it really is just a testament to who it is that you're playing with, because playing music with people is exactly that. You're playing with people. So and for someone like me, I think of myself as like a very responsive musician. um, that can kind of make or break me. There are definitely some instances, and it's something that I've worked on to be like, okay, like I am like almost overly responsive. Like I find that every once in a while, you're in a as a musician, like you want to be able to execute consistently no matter what the circumstance is, and maybe you end up in a circumstance where you just really can't hear very well, or maybe somebody you're playing with isn't playing like super sensitively. Um, and I used to kind of crash and burn in those circumstances. So it's something, again, another kind of juggling act, right? Where
Hmm.
it's like you need to be able to execute really well, but you also really need to be listening to what's going on because they're totally linked together. Um, so sorry, I'm trying to loop back around.
No, not at all. I gave you a big enough question to certainly, take your time.
So like playing like track and cascade in the studio, I worked really, really, really hard to prepare for that record, and felt pretty proud of myself with the results. I still hear things on that record where I'm like, could have done that better, or I wish this was that way, or whatever. Um, but again, a testament to the musicians that are playing on the record is that it's the same thing. All of those people are who they are in all of our eyes as musicians and listeners, not just because of their technical proficiency. It's because they're all really amazing ensemble players. So again, I think I expected myself to feel more nervous, but like a couple takes in on the first tune, it was like, no, this feels amazing. This is so fun.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. Well, my first thought when you say that those for both of those scenarios is, um, sure it's I think it's a fair question to ask um, how one would feel in those situations, but the answer is very illuminating. That your answer for both is um, not so much focused on yourself. It's about the situation you're in and the people you're with, and that taking yourself seems like you're somewhat taking yourself out of the equation in terms of being the main focus of what's going on. And so I think that's definitely something worth thinking about for myself anyway. So just to jump around a little bit because I'm trying to keep track of some things that I heard and then wanted to get back to. Um, I can't remember. At one point, we had talked about. I think we were talking about single string or just getting around the neck, and you mentioned getting comfortable with the way that you play single string or whatever it is by putting through a lot of language through that technique. And then you also just recently in this interview brought up transcribing. Do you have certain musicians or I would imagine that you're not just transcribing banjo players, but do you have maybe a couple people that you can talk about, or maybe some like meaningful material that you've found, and maybe how you've incorporated some of it into your playing, even if it's just in a general sense, the way that you incorporate some of the ideas, but because again, it's not like you're necessarily transcribing Earl Scruggs and J.D. Crowe exclusively and ending up here. So I'd be curious to know if you've got some kind of big influences in that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, Bela's influence like can't be undersung, right?
Mm,
I mean, he's the first banjo player that I ever heard, um, and he's the reason why I wanted to play the banjo at all. And I worked my way backwards and love traditional three-finger banjo playing. But the sounds that I heard Bela making were what made me want to play the banjo. So there's definitely been not necessarily transcribing whole solos of his, but like you know combing through for whether it's licks or kind of concepts. There's so much music in his playing. I can't like with in good conscience say that I haven't done that. Because how could you not? He's
mm,
like one of, I think, honestly, genuinely one of the most influential American musicians in the last like 100 years.
mm,
So much amazing music with so many different people. But some other people that I've really enjoyed transcribing from, and again, I almost never make it through a whole solo of anything. But let's see, Cannonball Adderley is someone that I've really liked taking some licks from. His blues playing is really awesome. It's got
mm.
really I don't know, just like it's pretty old school, I guess. So I enjoy a lot of it. Feels like it makes sense in the context in which I'm then gonna apply it because I'm not really trying to play jazz on the banjo. Um, let's see who else. Bill Evans, the pianist, also is someone certainly that I have transcribed from. Stuart Duncan is pretty amazing as a soloist. So many amazing ideas and so many things that are so hard on the banjo.
Mm. Yeah.
So sounds good. Um, I've found also that like just as much as kind of transcribing solos, again, kind of going back to that, like whatever you learn can kind of be deconstructed and weaponized, I guess, or whatever. Anytime I learn a fiddle tune or whatever it is, or I'm learning something for someone else's record, there's almost always something where it's like, oh, that's cool. Like I'm going to figure out. maybe I'm playing it melodic style right now, but like, how can I play this closed position? How
Hmm.
can I play this closed position so I can do it anywhere? And that's kind of thinking more from like a modular basis on the banjo. I think is a pretty functional approach, which a lot of time that means playing things closed position that you could play open, but when you reach a certain amount of like mechanical dexterity, you actually have more control over how the thing is phrased when you're playing it closed position than you do open a lot of the time.
Hmm.
Um,
And when you say closed and open, you're kind of referring to making this idea or this shape movable, so you're not kind of locked into this idea fits in this key on this chord in this
yeah,
area, you know?
right. Like here, this is my like F lick.
Yeah, right.
Is like I feel like that's a banjo player thought process right there, and it's totally reasonable, right? Because like I said before, that there's so much about how the instrument is played that's so not mechanical, that's not linear,
Hmm.
that it's really easy to be like, yep, I play this lick over an F chord, and not like, okay, I played this over an F chord. Now, how can I figure out how to do this everywhere else if I want to?
Yeah, right. And then it seems like a big challenge from that point is how do I, one person that I always think about it that does, I mean, there's a lot of people that do this well, but for instance, if you listen to Gnome, it strikes me that he's always, no matter where he goes, he always finds his way, like especially on a fiddle tune, for instance, if he's trying to playing somewhat inside on a fiddle tune or something, that no matter where he goes, he finds his way back to like a G lick at the end or something like that. Like that's such a common thing that it's like,
Yeah.
how did he know that was going to dovetail its way into a perfect path back to the open G string or something?
Well, isn't that the question? I
Yeah. Well,
think
and that's what I wonder about your playing as well, though, is because this is what I notice also about Tony Trischko or Bela Fleck or your playing as well is that you all kind of have your unique like way of doing that, your unique way, unique way of not playing um, uh, just like single string scales all over the neck for your entire solo. There's this movement from what might be something based in rolls, and then a melodic scale shape of some sort of, and these all seem to blend into each other, and you all seem to have your own unique way of doing that. So, is now that I think of it, is that something that maybe you've for the way that you're playing anyway? Does that come through when you're, for instance, practicing slowly on one of these tunes? Are you kind of finding pathways to move between these things, or do you have maybe a method that you've practiced some of that
it's a great
you
question.
know?
Like I said, it's been so organic for me. I think
Hmm.
that it's a hard one to, and I've kind of spent the last few years um, trying to cut to the core of it a little bit more in terms of how to teach it and talk about it concisely. But um, I mean, I think the root of it really is like that your ear can be connected to anything on the banjo. Like when I'm playing Scruggs style banjo, I'm hearing every note of what I'm playing.
Hmm.
Or if I am, that's when I'm playing it at my best.
Hmm.
I catch myself, especially with Scruggs style stuff, like you can kind of you can zone out like in that part of your brain a little bit, right? Because you're stringing together sentences of licks.
Hmm.
But if you really connect your ear to that, then it starts to make more sense, I think, how you could connect something role based that's kind of lyrically transferring into a melodic style lick, into single string, back into the Scruggs style. Like, all of it kind of ends up in one pot.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, and I would think just to bring it back to Mary Evelyn, also these that just makes me think of these shapes that where you have the line cliche in the bottom, and then the on the top, maybe these oscillating like two what you might call lead voices, is that it might be, yeah, that's a scenario where if you played something like that, it might be easy to only hear that top voice as being kind of the important thing that's happening. But it seems clear that I mean, just in the way that you're writing the tune, but also, I guess, how you're hearing the things that you're playing, that those are actually all kind of moving voices. You know, that's, which I can imagine. Not I can imagine. I can attest to the experience of that being very difficult, especially with the Scruggs style stuff. I think for myself, having spent so much time recently, well, this, you know, last the whole time I've been playing banjo, I guess, focusing a lot on Earl Scruggs or J.D. Crowe or Ron Stewart or whoever, if it is primarily this Scruggs style thing, um, that if you miss, not that you need to spend a whole lot of time on all of those people necessarily, but if you miss the differences, you might not be listening enough to the entire package of what's happening within all those roles. That even though it is all Scruggs style, like especially if you listen to Earl play, you know, any Flat Scruggs tune, and then JD in the 70s or the 80s play the same thing. It's like there's more going on there. But it seems like also the way that, especially in this tune, because it does include, you know, it's not like you play like the banjo G lick in it, but it does have like slide from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 on the third string. It's like these things that are connected, and yet they're fresh because they're in the context of this role-based playing where all the voices are important, which may not be the case necessarily in all versions of that slide from 2 to 4 lick that people play. That might not be the context that that's usually in. So, so that's very interesting. I have no question for all of that I just said. It's just my observation, and you can have that one for free, YouTube. Okay, so without launching into another full hour of me grilling you, I do have just a few more things to ask if you got the time. But one thing I'm curious about, now that the record is out, and I understand you've been practicing it again for a Banjo Summit performance, which is very cool as well. I'm always just so interested in what the kind of minutia of somebody's like daily practice looks like, or what they're thinking about. So after this large effort, I mean, I know you probably tracked this a while ago, but like what's on your mind now in terms of where you'd like your playing to be, or what you're percolating on, or even actually practicing? You know, what does some of that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's two main things on my mind right now. One is that Simon Crispin and I are looking to make another duo record this winter, and so that's one of my kind of the main focus shift happening right now, is like trying to put material together for that. I have a couple of tunes that I have in mind, but certainly not a whole half of a record. And then the other thing that's been on my mind lately is really kind of zoning in on my timing again. I worked really hard on like the mechanics of tone production from my right hand and left hand technique a lot in the last couple of years, and I think it's time for me to not necessarily like shelf that, but you know, you can only again like juggle so many things, I guess, and so playing with the Sam Bush band has definitely been like, I need to work on my timing. Like I mean, I don't think I'm doing like a terrible job or something, but like
I would guess not.
Scott Vestal, from in so many ways, but in particular from a rhythmic perspective, just pretty unparalleled, I think, actually, in terms of his rhythmic execution. with that band, and pretty much in any context, is just like pretty mind-bogglingly amazing. And there's some sounds like him and Sam playing unisons and stuff. There's some sounds that I want to make sure are still there.
Mm.
And I don't think, again, I don't think I'm doing like a terrible job or something, but like there's always ways to improve. I mean, that's one of the great things about music, is that it's a lifelong quest, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I've been working on that, doing metronome stuff, and playing along with recordings. Also, quite frankly, just listening back to things on Cascade. It's also easy. You're like, oh, like I'm doing this when I do that. Like, a record is a really great tool for bettering yourself.
Mm.
And that's always been the case, whether it was, the duo record with Simon, or Joy Kill Sorrow records, or whatever it is. There's, I think there's something that comes from hearing a sort of the best version of what you can do at the time, and hearing that repeatedly kind of cements those sounds. Like, I find myself not making mistakes I used to make after I've just like listened to the record, been through the mixing process and mastering process of a record. Um, but yeah, so metronome and getting to hang with Simon and make another record is nothing but a good thing rhythmically. That dude is really, really amazing,
Mm.
and especially from a rhythmic perspective.
Yeah, I would. Well, I don't know him, but having listened to the first record, if anyone hasn't checked out the record that Wes did with Simon Chrisman, I would imagine, especially, I mean, anything, but tune like Jane's Reel, in order for that to feel the way it does, I mean, there has to be some pretty significant rhythmic agreement, or something, whatever you want to call it, or something. But that's it's got drive in a certain way that has to really match up. Do you have like specific ways that you work with a metronome regularly, or yeah?
Yeah, and a lot of them I learned from Simon, actually. So one of the best ways to do it is to, for me at least, is to line up the micro and then think about lining up the macro. And the macro can kind of get as extreme as you would want it to get. And there were things that like I didn't really think were possible until I saw Simon and heard Simon doing them. So things like, you start with the metronome, if you're practicing rolls or practicing a tune, and thinking of those as eighth notes, right? You start with the click as eighth notes, like so, one note per click, and then you just start pulling them out. You start cutting it in half as many times as you can functionally do it. Like,
Yeah.
I've heard Simon practicing with the metronome where it comes on like beat 3 of like every fourth measure.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Like, so you have a really kind of deep understanding of the grid on the micro. It's like, this is how I subdivide, and then you also have this really deep understanding of like, am I speeding up, am I slowing down? um,
Mm.
that's been the best way for me to practice it. The other thing uh, that I've been interested in rhythmically is being able to control um, swing in my playing.
Mm.
I tend to play pretty straight in a lot of contexts, um, but there are times in the Sam Bush band where things are really bouncy.
Mm.
Awesome. I mean, it's super awesome, but I definitely catch myself being like, I'm not playing bouncy enough. Like, so that's been something that I've been digging into as well. Really wanting to, because I think we all, as banjo players, if you're listening, you should be adjusting your swing to what's going on around you. And I definitely have been doing that, and I think it's typically a pretty subconscious thing, right? That like, if a guitar player is putting more subdivision in their rhythm playing than just going boom chuck, right? and the mandolin typically is not just going chop, chop, chop. Like we're not the only instrument that's like dictating swing.
Hmm.
So you can infer a lot from what's going on around you. I think I just want to be able to control it um, on the more extreme swung end than I currently can.
Right. And which seems like a challenging thing. I mean, not that it's easy to do what you were just describing at the metronome, but at least as a concept is a little more concrete.
Yeah.
You get easier feedback anyway from listening to the metronome and where you're at with it. But so is that something that you kind of have to? Yeah, I'm curious actually. What if there's anything in particular you've been doing for that, or if that's something that you kind of just have to keep in your mind as you're practicing other things, or
Well, there are specific tunes where when I'm doubling with Sam, I want to swing it the way he's swinging it.
hmm.
And so practicing that provides a lot of perspective on it. Really digging into like really wanting that unison to be like dead on.
Right on it? Yeah.
But yeah, it is a little more nebulous when you're practicing it by yourself. I'm really excited to. So my wife is a healthcare provider, um, and she's actually well, we're moving back to the West Coast for. I live in Nashville. We're moving back to the West Coast for the winter months, um, and after we have quarantined for 2 weeks, Simon and I at some point are going to figure out how to make a record. And talking to him about swing and being able to kind of do duo metronome practice, which is something that we've done a lot,
Oh
um,
wow.
will be a really helpful thing for that. Um, right? Because sometimes it takes two. It actually can take two people to learn what you need to learn.
Hmm.
You can't just play by yourself and have things make sense.
Hmm.
If you're playing music that's meant to be played with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not preparing. If it's true that you get good at the things that you repeat or that you practice, on your own, you're never actually practicing that thing of playing with people. That's never actually happening if it's just you, I guess. So
Right. Which has
that,
been
that
an intense part of COVID for sure. It's like,
yeah, yeah, and it's I find it's funny you mentioned that playing with other people sometimes that's really how you learn certain things is it has to be with other people, and I guess it's a weird way of saying it, but I think it's strangely my guilty pleasure not to play with people because of how simple it can be to practice certain things because I'm not faced with the challenges that come with playing with other people. I don't know what that says about me, but uh,
I'll say that pre-COVID, I mean, my practice, my like kind of weekly practice routine always includes playing with other people.
hmm,
Like part of my goal is to like play tunes with someone at least once a week, if not maybe more than that, just to like keep that. I don't know. There's like a rigidity that comes from not doing that enough,
yeah,
that I just can't figure out any other way to, you know, yeah,
yeah. I think I've was lucky enough to be able, main, we've been lucky enough that going outside and being appropriate distance apart was doable this summer. That was actually I found that to be really productive to get in that habit of doing that. Yeah, so this will be an interesting winter to be sure with that. Not especially in Maine not being possible. So
right, yeah.
yeah, but so well, and kind of in that similar vein because we haven't really talked about this. I'm just aware of it, but I'm curious also if you have any insight about you told me that you've got kind of a weekly meeting hangout online with Tony Trischka,
Yeah.
which I'm sure any banjo player would love to do. But I'm curious about if that's a recent thing and maybe uh, how that. aside from the fact that it's nice to talk online with your friends. Not everything has to be a, a specific targeted practice routine thing, but I imagine it's been also there's been some insight about the banjo, about music, going back and forth. So, maybe that has served some sort of personal or some social purpose in all this. But maybe if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with Tony and some of the things that you don't have to reveal all of the secrets that you talk about all the time, but.
Yeah, we started doing that. I would guess probably uh, the passage of time has been so strange. I would say 3 months ago,
Mm,
maybe. We've missed a few weeks here and there, but and sometimes it's like 40 minutes long, and sometimes it's 2 hours long, depending on what we get into and how much time we have. But I mean, it kind of started as just like this would be fun, and let's just goof around on the banjo and see what we come up with, and we've come up with some cool ideas. Tony is really really good. Again, I'm like so bad at being organized about like kind of cataloging ideas and things like that. Like Tony's first uh, thing he always does is like if if I'm like, oh, what about if you do this? He's like, just a second. You know what I mean? So, and I'm so bad at that, but it's been really fun. It's been really fun, and I think probably one of my biggest takeaways from it is, among many things. I mean, Tony is one of my absolute banjo heroes. Is just how natural to the banjo so many of the things that he chooses to play are. Whether he's improvising or whether he's writing, there's like uh, it all just makes so much like banjo sense
mm,
in this beautiful way. I mean, because he's written so many cool tunes. I mean, he's written so much music, um, and and they all are so banjo-y, but and yet so distinctly musical. Um, yeah, I think that's been my main takeaway. And he's just I think it's always really positively reinforcing to be around someone who is just always excited for what's new. Always searching for what's new. Chris Eldridge is that same way too.
mm.
Having him produce my record was really fun. Getting to work with him beforehand and getting to work with him in the studio, he's just endlessly inquisitive. Whether it's about like a piece of gear because he's really really knowledgeable from the audio perspective as well, or if it's how a composition is like currently glued together. It's amazing and really inspiring. So I think the more that I get the privilege to hang out with kind of hero figures like that, the more I realize this common thread of people who are just kind of always open, always inquisitive about what's what's next, or what's in front of them. Like, why is this piece of music working the way that it works?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I would imagine just having been around Tony a little bit that he is that kind of endless source of curiosity and also just knowledge too. Um, One of the only people that can show me what the best fingering for playing an exact Bill Monroe transcription on the banjo would be. I don't get that information from anybody else. Um, uh, okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask the most important banjo questions, and I've left them till the end, and I'll try to remember what they all are. It's obviously picks, thumb pick, uh, banjo information, including but not limited to bridge, head tension, tone ring,
Yeah.
uh, string height if you can manage that as well, neck width, anything you can give us that is going to help us immediately play exactly like you would be great.
Sure. Yes. Okay. Pick. for the last couple of years, and this is a weird one. I think everybody thinks I'm insane. I've been using the stainless steel MP2s
Hmm.
for the last probably 3 or 4 years. Um, I really like them a lot, and it's not really about that. Like, I feel like a lot of people talk about their immediate response is like, "Oh, those will never wear out. That's great." And it's like, yeah, that's sort of an added bonus. Although, actually, from my perspective, this is in whatever 4 years or something. This is probably the fourth or fifth pair for
Hmm.
me. So actually, they do. They sound the best when they're brand new.
Hmm.
Um, but they're really really responsive. So for me, I'm not really looking to like. I don't want to play really hard all the time. It just doesn't. And I think that there are plenty of great players, who do actually kind of play pretty hard all the time, but are still really loose. But for me, I feel like I can get a lot of sound with these picks, um, with kind of a minimal amount of effort, I suppose. And there is a bit of a added brightness to them, but in a way that I guess I probably compensate for with setup to
Hmm.
some degree. I would rather have like a really dark setup on the banjo and then have my right hand actually be a little bit brighter, like that gets a lot of response out of that instrument than the other way, like having a really really fairly bright instrument that I'm then playing really darkly, um, for whatever reason, just like from, I don't know, the geometry of my right hand, it just doesn't work as well. And then I'm using these Dunlops. What are these? The Ultex? Is that what that is?
Is it perhaps one of
Yeah.
these?
Yeah. Yep. Using those. Let's see. Strings. I'm using plain steel strings, and they are 10, 11, 13, 20, 10.
Hmm. Are
Uh,
those the Dario ones or the GHS ones?
uh, I kind of just, like, gone back and forth with lots of things,
Yeah.
because it's technically, I think, a custom set, right? That you
Oh,
have to.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have like a weird backlog of strings. I have this like massive Tupperware
Yeah. Yeah.
full of strings. And then I'll realize, like, 2 days before a tour, that I'm actually like almost out of 13. I don't know. I also don't change my strings very often.
Oh, interesting. Do you know like how? Well, two questions. Do you know how often you might change them in the midst of long periods of no gig? And then if you were like back to back gigs for a week, how much would you change them?
Uh, I played a 14 show run with Sam and didn't change my strings.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I just don't like. I tracked Cascade on strings that were probably 2 months old. I just don't. I don't kill strings. Like,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, that's super interesting. I because I apparently I do. That's or
no,
something. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna ask a lot of people this question now because that's so.
yeah,
It feels like I meet two kinds of people, like very often or not so much. But
sure. Yeah, I think I have, whatever. I mean, I know friends that, like, if they played my banjo for 5 minutes, it the strings would be more dead from them playing those in those 5 minutes than I would ever make them in my life.
interesting. Yeah.
I've never broken a string ever, um, on stage, off stage.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know. So, yep, strings. Let's see what else. This banjo that I was just playing for you, which I also did this, the camp concert for Banjo Summit, which is essentially a karaoke version of my own record. So I had mixes of my record without banjo, and I essentially overdubbed over my whole record on camera, which I'm actually really excited about. I worked really, really hard to be able to do it. It's kind of a complicated feat.
I would
Um,
imagine. Yeah. Is that
not
available anywhere? Is that something you can watch?
Yes, it will be. It will.
Okay.
Be. I'm not exactly sure. It's a Banjo Summit, specific thing, for a couple weeks, and then I'll put it out on YouTube.
Super cool. Okay.
Um, And let's see here. Yeah, so that banjo is a TD1. That actually the pot is Noam Fakilny's. Noam lives like a mile away, and we banjo nerd together. You know, I mean, not very much right now, but in the past, we've kind of been each other's go-tos. Like, does this sound good? Does this feel right? You know, and both of our wives think we're equally insane, I think. So,
Of course, of course.
but that banjo sounds amazing. It's a first generation Huber ring
Hmm.
in that pot. I'm not sure what year it is. I've only had it like a month or something. The neck that's on it is a Huber neck. It's kind of their wider radius neck. Um, I just had it refretted. I've kind of drifted that neck to a number of different pots. That neck is currently fretted in like really big Evo frets, also, which I really like a
Hmm.
lot. Those are those like gold frets. You can't really even tell until you're really close that they're gold.
Yeah. What's the material that Evo is that? I guess is it Evo?
Yeah,
um,
it's called, but it's just it's not quite as hard as stainless steel, so it's not quite as hard on the luthier's tools,
hmm.
but it lasts a long time. I mean, like
Okay.
I've played even though I've only had it this way for a month or so. Like I've already put, I think I would have already noticed fret wear from how much I've played
Hmm. Yeah.
if they were standard, really soft fret wire. Um, the head is at a little bit of it's kind of in between F sharp and G. The tailpiece is pretty high. It's a pre-war Presto. Um, the action is, I would probably call it medium low. I've had action lower than what's on this currently.
Yeah.
The bridge that's on it is oh man, I okay. It's made by a Japanese man who is a doctor actually, and also a banjo player. And I only know this because Gabe Hirschfeld gave me this bridge. I only know this because I sent a picture of it to Hiro Arita, who is an unbelievable banjo player,
Hmm.
lives in Japan. And he was like, "Oh, I know it was made by this man," and I'm not sure if he ever told me his name or if he did. I'm forgetting it. Um, I'm he might be making me some more of them. I would love to get them. It has a kind of particular grain on the wood that I've never quite seen before on the maple. But the banjo that I played on Cascade is a Hawthorne top tension, a copy of a RB7 that has a second generation HR30 ring in it. The head was at F sharp, had a Price tailpiece on it that was pretty high, kind of like Bela setup window is kind of how I think about it, right?
Hmm.
Tailpiece that's pretty high. It doesn't have an inch tall bridge on it. I think it has a uh, 11/16 or something around in there. But head down in like F sharp zone, kind of Bela setup window. You get a lot of bass response, a lot more overtones, and this kind of if it's set up right, I think a really kind of open elegance, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like my attempts at kind of messing with that style of setup lately has been a lot about finding the balance between opening up the sound in a certain way without it becoming kind of well, I don't know if like yeah, loose is just the feeling. It's like you can really just loosen everything if you want, but that's not really quite what's happening with those setups.
Yeah, yeah, because there's certain things that have to be. I mean, wow, we're really getting into it. The um, uh, adjusting the coordinator rods.
Hmm.
I don't actually turn them very much, but I do adjust the bolts on them quite a bit.
Hmm.
So you're kind of like making sure that you're kind of pushing out on the pot assembly with the optimal amount of force, and it literally is the difference of like not even a quarter turn.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's all very useful information for me. I intend to take all of that. Um, anyway, so again, not to, as I said 30 minutes ago, not to launch into another hour of questions. I'll give you that hour of questions some other time. But I do just want to say I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me about all this stuff, but also thank you for putting out this record, and thank you for being the banjo person that you are, the person that you are, but also the banjo person that you are.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's an honor to be here. Eli.
Can you tell that I'm a professional? Also want to mention for anyone who doesn't know yet, because if you're watching this video, then hopefully you've seen the video I already posted of the tune and solo from Mary Evelyn. But you should check out this record. You must check out this record. If you go to wescorbett.com, you can buy this record. I believe that's the appropriate place for that.
Yeah, you can also, buy it and stream it in all the places. If you'd like to actually get a physical copy of it, that's the best place to go.
Oh, great. Cool. And I imagine Wes can also I know Wes can be found on Instagram as well, for all the professional value Instagram holds for us bluegrass musicians. TikTok, probably not, I would guess.
My wife loves TikTok. She's trying to get me to get a TikTok, so maybe it'll happen.
I too have been coaxed perhaps towards TikTok. I have not taken that step, but maybe we'll talk about that as well. I know Little Roy is on TikTok. I don't know if you know that.
I don't. That sounds amazing, though. Yeah, we
It truly is. Yeah, it's as amazing as it sounds. Anyway, yeah, so check out that record. Make sure you check out the record you did as well with Simon Chrisman. And I also love the records that you did with Joy Kills Sorrow, and I love watching videos of you with the Sam Bush Band, and I can't wait to see that in person as well. Yeah, this has been a pleasure, and I can't wait to dive into this. So if you're watching this video and you've made it to this point, look forward to more videos, hopefully deconstructing some of these ideas. But just in case, Wes, do you have anything you'd like to share or plug that I've forgotten or?
I teach private lessons. If that's something that you're interested in, you can also contact me through my website, wescorbett.com. And I take folks of any level.
Very cool, very cool. And I know I've learned a lot from Wes, and I know a lot of people who have, so I can attest to that being a sound decision. Well, this has been really great. Thanks so much for talking to me, and hopefully we can talk and play in person sometime again soon.
Like that.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Eli.